Hello and welcome to this video all about the fundamentals of using Protobot Beta 1.3. We'll be going over all of the main features and concepts you need to know when using Protobot in this version, all while building a simple assembly. Alright, let's go ahead and get started. So as you can see right now I'm in the splash screen, which is what appears right when you open up Protobot. And you can see we have a few options here, but for right now we're going to go ahead and press Create New. Alrighty. So now we have a blank slate of a build here, and I'll go ahead and direct your attention to this upper part of the screen. This is the top bar. It contains some of your basic functions such as your file, edit, and help sort of menu options. You have undo, redo, toggling the grid on or off, allowing the user to only select holes. That's also a toggle, and the toggling of shadows if you just don't want to see them or you do want to see them. Under Edit, if we go ahead and click on Edit, you'll see Preferences. So if we go ahead and open up the Preferences menu, you can see that here we can modify all of the main keybinds associated with your major functions that you like to do. Undo and redo are all here if you'd like to change them. Also for camera settings, this is a common thing people like to change, are the camera keybinds. You can change these to your liking, as well as the sensitivities and inverting some of these options, all to your liking. Also included are some selection keybinds. Once again, you can make them whatever you'd like. Alright, so now that we've gone over most of what the top bar is all about, let's go ahead and start off over here. This over here is the Add menu. It's all about adding objects or parts to our build. So you can see we have quite a few parts here. We can scroll through this entire list with our scroll wheel. We can also search for parts right here, and we also have shortcuts, or sort of like shortcut buttons, to some of the most common parts that are used mainly for connecting objects together. And we'll go over sort of connecting objects later, but for now let's go ahead and just add a simple C channel. So let's click on C channel here. You'll see that a C channel appears to follow my cursor as I move around. And if I actually want to add a C channel into the build, just go ahead and click, and you'll see that the C channel appears. I can add as many as I'd like, as you can see here, and all I have to do is press the escape key to stop adding the C channel. Now you may have noticed as I was adding the C channel, I'll go ahead and click on it again, that there are options down here. If I click this size option, you can see I have three options here. I have 1x3, which is this larger C channel here. I can go ahead and scroll with my scroll wheel in the build view, and you can see that you can zoom in. We'll go over more of the camera controls in just a bit. But you can see now it's a 1x3 C channel. I can place it right here, and there you go. You can also scroll through the size options. For example, I'll go ahead and scroll upwards, and you can see how our size option there, I scrolled downwards. But if you scroll up and down, you can see that you can go and scrub through all of the options. So if I scroll all the way up, here's our 1x5 C channel. And right here is our length, or width in this case. And you can see it's measured in holes. Right now you can see all the C channels that we're adding are all 5 holes wide. And we can go ahead and change that. So if you click on the number itself, you can type in a value, such as, let's say 35, which is the largest value in this case, and we can go ahead and add that too. It's very big. But you can also scroll through this option. If I scroll downward, you can see that the number of holes decreases, and this makes it really easy to go ahead and get to a certain hole count that you want without having to start typing on your keyboard. But if you want to type on your keyboard an exact amount, you can go ahead and do that. I actually really like the scrolling feature. Alright, well we have a ton of C channels in our build here. I'm going to go ahead and add a 1x3 15-hole C channel. Or not 1x3, let's go ahead and add a 1x2 15-hole C channel. And you know what, why not do a 16-hole C channel? Let's do a 1x2 16-hole C channel, and we'll go ahead and add that to the build right there. And I'll press escape, and there we go. We have our 1x2 16-hole C channel. Now what I want to do is I actually want to get rid of all of these other C channels. So how do we do that? Well, much like any other program, you can actually just click on these objects directly, and you can see that they outline in blue, which means you have selected them. You'll also notice that we can highlight holes. You'll see that all of the holes in this C channel all highlight. If I zoom into this one, you can see that all the holes are highlighting in white. If I click on it, you'll see that it now highlights in blue, and the object associated with that hole highlights in sort of a lighter blue, showing that it's connected to that hole. We'll get familiar with that other outline very soon. And so that's about it. You can select holes, you can select objects, and that's the cool thing there. Now let's go ahead and delete all of them. So if you go ahead and just click on each one and press delete, you'll see that they all disappear. We can also select them in mass by holding the letter B on our keyboard and dragging the mouse. You'll see this sort of box appear, and anything that's covered inside of this box, if we release B over them, you'll see that they all become selected. If we press delete, there they all go. And there we go. So now we just have this object here. So while we have this object here, let's go ahead and learn some of the camera controls. So first off, we have what I showed you earlier with zooming. You can do this with the scroll wheel or with this button up here, where if you click on it and move your mouse up and down, the zoom distance will change. There's also panning, which if you click this button and move your mouse around, your view will pan back and forth. You can also do this by holding middle mouse, or if you changed it in the preferences, whatever you set it to. And similarly for orbit, you can click on this button and you can orbit around the center of your view. You can also do this by holding right click. And there you go. Now let's say I panned all the way over here like I was earlier, and I want to have my view centered around this C channel right here. Well, I can do it by moving my camera myself, but you can also go ahead and just click this and press this focus button right here, and you'll see that our view aligns with the center of the C channel. Now you might also notice this button right here. This is the orthographic mode. If I click on it, you can see that we enter this sort of flat style view, where if we go sideways on any of these views, or sideways on any of the parts, you'll see that the view flattens entirely, sort of showing a 2D projection of the otherwise 3D objects in our build. This can be really useful for lining things up and just making sure everything is sort of lined up correctly, right? And it has great uses in a lot of situations, but for now we'll go ahead and turn it off. That is always an option there for you though. And let's go ahead and get started with sort of making our assembly here. All right, but before we do, we actually need to learn one more thing. We need to learn about these tools over here. So the main way you interact with objects is by moving them around, and you can either do that by using two tools. That is the transform tool, which we'll turn on right now. If you have anything selected, note that when I don't have anything selected, it won't show up. But once I select something, whether it be a hole or an object or whatever, our transform tool appears, and it basically works like any standard transform tool would. If you press on these arrows and click and drag, you'll see that our object moves along that axis. Same for the green and same for the red. These squares right here move the object along the blue plane, so the plane represented by the blue axis. Same for red and same for green. And these little rings right here, if we click on them and rotate our mouse around the ring, you'll see that our object rotates about that axis. And you can see that we can go back and forth and adjust them at whatever increment we like. And same for red, and of course, same for green. And that's it. That's pretty much how the transform tool works. Very useful for pretty much using any object and just moving it and getting it to where you want it to go. Now, it can be really useful to move things like this, right? But sometimes we might want to go ahead and move things to very precise positions. Like let's say I want to add a screw, and I click on this screw right here, or I can click this one. These are both valid. And you'll notice that I have a ton of options for my screw right here, about 11 options right here. I can also scroll with my mouse wheel like I said earlier. We'll go ahead and choose a 1/2 inch screw. Now it would be great if, for example, we placed this here, we stopped placing it, and we could try our best to sort of make sure it's aligned properly with everything. But in reality, this is where the move tool comes in. For example, I'll turn on the move tool and you'll see this sort of little grabbing icon, this sort of move icon here. If we click on it, it'll look very similar to placement, except for you'll notice we're not placement, adding an object. We're not adding an object, we're just moving it. So for example, if we hover over any hole here, you'll see that the screw automatically positions itself correctly, just as you'd expect it would. So here our screw is positioning itself right where it should without me needing to sort of know anything about how any of this works. So for example, that's just how screws work. What else is great about the move tool is that everything you can do in the move tool, you can also do with the objects you're placing. So for example, if I stop moving, you'll see that the screw goes right back to where it was. And if I click on the screw again, but this time I'm in placement, I'm choosing this through placement, that's why this is activated, you'll see that it's the same idea. And more importantly, you can actually place multiple screws at a time, which can be super useful when you're just trying to connect a ton of objects together. And so speaking of connecting, let's go ahead and connect some stuff up. So we're going to start off by deleting a few things because I need to make sure everything is set up properly. So here we have our C channel, right? We're actually going to go ahead and move on to the inside all the way over here. And we're going to go ahead and actually find ourselves a flat bearing, which is right here. And so you can see here's our flat bearing following our mouse cursor. But if we hover over a hole, a bearing has the unique effect of automatically positioning itself right where a hole should go. And it's very, very, very convenient, these features. What's important to note is that almost every object or every part that you can add has these features built in. Pretty much every object, if you can think of a place where it could go, it can probably go there. And I'll explain more of this sort of intuitive concept as we move on. So I'll go ahead and click right there. We have added our bearing. We're going to go ahead and add another one just about right here instead, about one away from that one. And then we're actually going to face head on like this. We want to place this one instead about here. So it's one hole away from the edge. This one's one hole away from the edge, and this one's one hole away from this bearing here. This way it's aligned this way for a very specific reason, and we'll see the kind of effect that takes on later. All right, let's go ahead and stop placing these bearings, and we're going to go ahead and attach them properly to our system here. So in order to do this, we're going to go ahead and grab our screw, and we're going to be doing a few things here. So first off, we're going to be taking our screws, we're going to be flipping around to the other side of our C channel. And as you can see, we want to put them on either opposite side of these bearings, except for this one where we're going to be putting them on these two. And you'll see why in just a minute. We'll keep it at a 1/2 inch, and we'll go here, here. And you can see, actually, this is where the orthographic tool comes in very handy, because you can slightly see an outline where the bearings are. And there we go. So if we place them there just like that, and we move around, you can see we have all of our nice sort of screw holes nicely set up here. And, well, there we go. We have, this is going to be a hole where a shaft's eventually going to go, and this is where the motor is going to go. All right, so now we have it set up. I'll press escape to exit the add menu. And now we're going to go ahead and add nuts to the end of these shafts to allow connections to form. And this is precisely how connections form in Protobot and how you get objects to group together. So for example, if I click on this nut option here, I'll click on it, you see my mouse is now holding onto a nut here. If I go ahead and hover over the screw, you'll see here that it goes directly to where the end of the screw is. And if I go ahead and click, there we go. It's right at the end. And if I do these for every single screw except for these, this is where a motor is going to go. If I do them right here, and I press escape and click, you'll notice these guys are not connected because there's no sort of nut at the end. But if I click on just the C channel, ooh, we have more colors here. So for example, you can see that these are highlighted, this bearing here, as well as the screws are all highlighted with a different color. This means that they're all connected, and you can actually see them move together when we switch to the transform tool and use it. You can see that everything moves but these because, of course, there's no connections made here. It just kind of makes sense. So if we're going to go ahead and undo that to bring it all back. And there we go. That's about it for that. Now we got to go ahead and add a motor to do the final bit of setup here. So we're going to go ahead and add a motor. Let's scroll all the way down. It should be right at the bottom. There's our motor. We're going to go ahead and slightly turn around a little bit. I'm going to move my view just because we need to get access to these motors. Now, motors have no automatic placement on screws because there's multiple holes. So we're going to go ahead and place this motor first. Press escape to exit the menu, and we have to select a specific hole on this motor that we want to match up with our screw. So I'm actually going to, we want this hole right here, the shaft hole, to line up with this hole here. So we'll just select the middle, make sure we're on the move tool, click, and if we hover over this screw, you can see actually, you can see it's trying to line up with all those two. You can see that if we do this, our shaft hole is now correctly aligned. That's pretty lucky. Sometimes it won't line up correctly. If you wanted instead it to go on the other side, we can press the R button while rotating, and you'll see a sort of ring appear. And if we move our mouse around, you can see you can rotate about the center of whatever you are moving. You can press R again to exit. We'll go ahead and select here and click to place, and there we go. Now we have this line correctly positioned, and if you hadn't noticed, all of these are colored, which means if we select our motor again and move all these together, you'll see all of these objects now move together, because of course a motor would effectively grab a screw and put them all nicely together. Well, there we go. Now we have a connection formed. All right, so now we have that, we're gonna go ahead and do some work with screws. So let's go ahead, or not screws, we're gonna be working with shafts. So now we have screw connections forming, let's go ahead and get some shaft connections forming. So we need a few shafts. We're gonna go ahead and start off by clicking on our shaft option here. And we can change the size. Now the cool thing about shafts is that they can accept decimal amount on sizes. You see that this one is facing up and down because I clicked on this hole here. But you can see, for example, if I type 2.3, here we are. Now we have a 2.3 inch shaft. Perfect. So I'm actually going to use a 2.5 inch shaft, and that's going to go right here. You'll notice that when I hover over the motor, the shaft automatically positions itself right where I need it, so that it is right inside of the motor hole without me needing to worry about exactly how it works or having to put the shaft here. Now it's the best option to go ahead and just put it right onto the motor. And like I said earlier, if you can think of a way that an object might move, it can probably go there. So we'll go ahead and click, and there we go. Our motor appears there. We're going to need a little bit of a longer shaft for these specific ones over here. And we'll just go ahead and place them directly onto the hole there. Like I said, I increased, if you scroll, it increases it by 1 on whatever you set it to. So it went up to 3.5 there. And I'll click on these two options, I'll press escape, and you can see now, there we go. We have now 3 shafts nicely positioned. We're going to go ahead and start off with this one here, where we're going to be adding a few objects onto it. Or actually, we're going to really work with all of them. We're going to add some spacers. So we'll go ahead and head over here, click on spacer, and you can see we have some options. There we go. We have nylon spacer right here. There's 2 options, nylon and high strength, but we're not going to be using high strength because these are normal shafts. We'll increase our size up to about 1/4 to give us enough ample room to place something else onto this shaft without hitting those screw heads. And what's amazing is if you hover over a shaft, you'll notice how it immediately locks onto it. And as I move closer towards the end, you'll see it sort of flips. Sometimes it will flip, sometimes it won't. But the whole idea is that as you approach a hole, such as this hole on this C channel, that the nylon spacer will automatically clip to it. And if I click, there you go. The nylon spacer is now properly placed, and it's incredibly intuitive, just sort of thinking, oh, can I put that there? There you go. And it's super easy. Just click and it'll place. Great. So now we have some good spacing there. Let's go ahead and press escape. We're going to be adding a set of gears right here. We can go ahead and click on the gear option. Now you'll notice that same process here. As I move towards these shafts, you'll see that it automatically places it. Very good. And we're going to need a bigger gear here though, so I'm actually going to make it a 60-tooth gear by scrolling through these options. You can also, like I said, click on these and click on 60-tooth, but I always love scrolling. So we'll go ahead and go over on this shaft, wait until it aligns, click here, and click here. And now, if we press escape, you can see that all of these gears are perfectly aligned and perfectly positioned for the wheels to these 2 shafts here to spin in the same direction. And it works really well there. That's awesome. So cool. Now we have that. We're going to want to add a wheel. But first off, we're going to need a little bit more spacing. So I'm going to go to the spacer. It's still on 1/4 just like it was before. We're going to go ahead and put that right on the end of these here, just as we did earlier with the other spacers, just to give us some ample room for the wheels. And there we go. So now we can go ahead and head on over to the wheels. We'll go ahead and use, how about a traction wheel? We'll go ahead and use some, how about these 3.25 inch traction wheels. Now you'll notice as I move them, okay, see that one is positioned correctly. You'll see usually when it flips it's good. And when I click here, you'll see that it's nicely positioned. You'll also notice the shaft insert that automatically adds itself. Whoa. You'll notice the shaft insert that automatically adds itself as we place here, which is great to allow for the proper spacing because of the differently sized shafts. That is automatically calculated, so you don't have to do that. We'll add another wheel right here, and there we go. Now we have all of that set up. Perfect amount of space to add a shaft collar, which is what we're going to be doing next. So you'll notice that if I click on this motor, that all of the previous stuff that we connected earlier is nicely connected and good to go. However, our other objects here are not connected, and I can't move them together. But in order to do that, well, think of what would you do in real life. You're going to be using a shaft collar, or whatever set of shaft collars. And that's why there's a shortcut button right here. Click on shaft collar, you'll notice that we have the normal type of shaft collar that goes on these shaft collars right here, or on these shafts right here. There's also options for the clamping kind, which is the much larger version that uses a screw to tighten. And there's a high strength version of this specific kind of shaft collar. We'll be using just a normal one, and it has no extra options. And we're going to go ahead and add it right here. You'll notice that it hits just on the edge there. And we'll add one here as well, and one right here. There we go. It's all up in the front. So we're done now, right? Actually, no, because you'll notice that there's no change. No change happened. All the objects are still disconnected. That's because in real life, you still need to add a shaft collar to the other side. For example, if I come to this side, I rotate my view, do a little bit of panning, you can see that over here, that these don't have a shaft collar on this side, which means I could very easily, from this direction, just pull this shaft out. So in order to tighten this entire group, I have to put a shaft collar here, another one on the other side right here, as well as in this very small space, and thank you for these options here, in this tiny space right here. And I'll go ahead and click, and there we go. Now we've formed those groups. It doesn't seem like we formed those groups, but just because of the way it works, if I click on any object here, like this wheel, we now have a full-fledged group. And I can go ahead and click on the transform tool, and you can notice that we now have a nice little assembly, including a motor, 3 gears, and 2 wheels that are both going to move in the same direction with the motor. Okay, so now that we have this assembly built, let's go ahead and do some cool things with it. So the cool thing about these kind of assemblies is you can do, as you can see, they all move together very nicely. Whenever you want to duplicate something, if you ever want to make sort of copies, right? You can go ahead and hold the Alt key. This can only be done in the transform tool right now. If you hold the Alt key and move the object in whatever direction you'd like, you'll notice that a copy sort of materializes as you move it up. And now we have a full copy, a fully separate group from this one. And now we have a whole copy that we can, for example, rotate to the other side. We can enter the orthographic mode just like this, position it just like this. We can go sideways, position it to match with the other one. And as you can see, we now have 2 positioned assemblies that we might want to go ahead and put together and make into one sort of large robot. So let's go ahead and do that. So we have these 2 right here, and we're going to go ahead and connect them up with a plate. So let's go ahead and click on a plate, and you'll see we have some options for length and width, and we can go ahead and scroll through the length. I'll go ahead and make this 15 holes wide, and I'm okay with the 5 hole width, and we can go ahead and click, and there's our plate. So how do we make this connect with the other one? So first off, I'm going to actually move this a little bit out of the way, move it over here, and what we're going to do is we're going to move our camera a little bit. We want to make this hole right here. We're going to go ahead and make it, actually we're going to make this hole right here, and we're going to click on the move tool, click on this, and you'll see that we have movement organized around this hole. And if we move our view and select this hole specifically, our plate is positioned sort of where we want it, but we want to rotate it about so it's just like this. And I pressed R to go ahead and enable this rotation so I can rotate about where I'm pointing. And if I click, there we go. Now this plate is exactly where I want it to go. And now I just need to make sure that these 2 holes right here line up. Now you might be interested to know that I need to line up the top of this hole with the other side of this hole right here. So how do I make it? I can do it sort of by going down here and clicking like this, but there's an easier way where you can hover over a hole and press spacebar and then click, and there you go. You have now selected the other side of the hole. We won't do it for this side though. We're going to go ahead and do that in just a second. We'll click on this hole right here, click on the move tool option, hover over this hole. You'll see that it goes on top. We don't want it to go on top, so we'll press spacebar to flip it to the other side while holding spacebar, pressing R to enter rotate mode. Keep on holding spacebar, and we'll go ahead and rotate until it is correctly aligned. And we'll click to confirm, and now we have a plate correctly positioned. But you'll notice they're still separate. That's because we need to screw the plates onto each individual C-channel. So we'll click on the screw. We'll make it a 3/8 size screw, and we'll go ahead and click on this hole right here, this hole right here, flip on over to this hole and this hole. And there we go. Now we'll tighten those by adding some nuts. We'll just hover over the screw. It'll automatically add to the bottom. Just click on each one. And now, if we leave the add menu and we click on any object, let's say this right here, this plate, you'll see everything is now selected. And we now have, finally, a full sort of assembly here. We have 2 sets of wheels organized and connected by a plate. It's not the most efficient design, but it is a prototype of some kind of robot, which is the entire point of Protobot. All right, well, that's about it for this video. Hope you learned something about the fundamentals of using Protobot Beta 1.3. If you'd like to learn more, you can go ahead and watch a few other tutorials if they are currently available on the Protobot YouTube channel. And that's about it. Thanks for watching.